Welcome back to the We're the Brits in America podcast. Today we have an Ask an Expert show where I invite a fellow professional in the US-UK cross-border space to come in and talk to me about the issues we think Brits in America need to be aware of if they are going to thrive here. We have a very special episode for you today. I am delighted to be joined by Duncan Edwards. Duncan is the CEO of British American Business, the leading transatlantic trade organisation of some 450 companies, of which Plan First Wealth is one, that has an ongoing mission to support policies which protect and enhance the environment for trade and investment in and between the US and the UK. Duncan is a Brit living in America, specifically Connecticut and New York, and prior to his involvement with BAB, he spent over 30 years as a media executive, much of it at the Hearst Corporation. What's more, at the end of 2023, Duncan received an OBE in recognition of his work in strengthening US and UK relations and trade, which is quite something. So today we have some fertile ground to cover. We're going to talk about BAB and the great work they do as an organisation. We've timed this episode to coincide with the launch of their updated Trade and Investment Guide to the US, which is a critical resource for UK companies seeking to expand into the US. So obviously we're going to get into that. If time permits, we'll get into the UK government state-led MOU scheme with US states, which sounds like it presents some significant opportunities for certain UK businesses. And of course, we'll go wherever else this conversation takes us if we think it has the potential to help British expats already in America or Brits eyeing up America to thrive here. So, without further ado, let's get into this. Duncan, welcome to the We're the Brits in America podcast.
Well, thank you, and thanks for that fantastic introduction, and thank you also for being a member in British American Business.
Of course, it's great. I really like it. And I should also just shout out with the team producing this podcast. The podcast guys are also fellow members.
They certainly
are.
Did you meet
a family affair?
Did you meet the podcast guys through British American Business?
We did. Do you know, it's actually good. It's evidence of this working. We joined, I think, the first email that went out, group email, podcast guys were featured. That led to a call with Dan, and that led to the We're the Brits in America podcast.
You know, that's such a great story, and I'm so pleased to hear it, because we know this happens. I mean, one of the functions of British American Business is to be exactly that, this kind of networking community where companies with different skills and different services can meet each other. And we hear about this all the time, but I hadn't realised that was the case with you guys. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, and we're Americans now. I'm an American. You've been in America a long time, and there's a lot I love about America and Americans and working with Americans. But I'm still a Brit, and I love working with Brits. I do feel with something like the podcast guys, where Dan is very much British and Sam, who produces our show, is very much American. I enjoy the dynamic, and I think it works. I think that mingling of the two worlds really works. So yeah.
Well, and it's a really interesting kind of background. UK companies have been doing business in the US for the last 200 years. So, and it continues to be the place where more likely than not, a UK company that is looking to expand outside of the UK, it's more likely than not that the US is the place that they're going to try. And not really surprising if you think about it. There's the attractiveness of the market. It's such a great market. It's huge. Vibrant, entrepreneurial, relatively few kind of formal barriers to entry, and then all the other things which mean it's familiar to the UK, language and the way the justice system works and so on and so forth. So it's not really surprising that UK companies have been trying their luck in the UK for the last 200 years and more. And by the way, it's the same the other way around. US companies have been doing business in the UK as well. And basically since the end of the 1812 war. So there's been peace between the two countries for 212 years. So that's a very positive thing.
So ever since we burnt down the last White House,
Exactly.
right? The first White House,
Exactly.
we've been trading. So what you just said is so true. It's such a natural, successful British business owner. It is natural that the gaze turns to America because of the language and because of the size of the market and its reputation for entrepreneurialism. That being said, though, there are major challenges. It's not just, oh, great, America speaks the same language, let's go. And how do you ensure you are the Beatles and not Oasis? Because Oasis were a huge British band, and I remember listening to the radio here. This is during COVID, actually, and the radio presenter said, "Oh yeah, they played Wonderwall," and they said, "Oh yeah, Oasis. Do you remember that? What happened? One hit wonder." And as a Brit from Manchester, you think, "Oh, one hit wonder? Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
And it really brought home there's a lot of broken dreams, British broken dreams in America.
And the analogy is a good one, Oasis, or how do you not be the Kinks either? Who arguably just as good as the Beatles at the same time and completely failed in the States. So, look, the truth is that with all the attractiveness of the US market, it's still the case that the failure rate for companies coming here is still quite high. And that's for lots and lots of reasons. More often than not, I think it's a lack of preparation. And you just because the US speaks English and we've got that cultural familiarity mainly because of media, film and television and so on, it feels very familiar. You have to treat it as a foreign country. You have to make the same kind of preparation for market entry as if you were preparing to go into India or Indonesia or somewhere else where they may not speak the same language. So there's more often than not, the reason for failure is a lack of proper preparation about what you need to think about when making a market entry here, because there are some big differences, and you'll know this as well, that you also can't think of the US as a single market, because it isn't a single market. It is at least 50 markets, with each state having its own laws and regulations and so on, and licensing requirements and so on. Each market having profound differences in the availability of workforce and the cost of that workforce. And of course, differences in the market opportunity as well. So, if you want to sell farm machinery, you've got to go to the Midwest, but if you want to sell financial services, you've got to go to New York City. So, you've got to really think about it and plan it. And over the years, over the decades, whilst there have been some fantastic success stories, there have been some pretty significant failures as well. You think of important names like Marks and Spencer when they bought Brooks Brothers here, that didn't work. Tesco riding on the back of huge success in the UK 25 years ago, thought they could do convenience food better than the Americans, and spent a huge amount of money in California and failed. So there are some big mistakes, but you have to be thoughtful, careful, do all the preparation that you need to do before you pull the trigger.
Said another way, it's unrealistic expectations, and that expectation, I think, comes from it's the familiarity. We grow up watching American TV, we speak the same language, ex-colony, we think we know America, and we do, but we don't. And there are many similarities, but there are also massive differences. And I think that we actually had another BAB member, Christy Woskobojnik of DY, Dyke Yaxley, on a few weeks ago, and she brought up that point that the biggest mistake she sees is people coming in thinking of America as one single market and not realizing it's 50 individual states. And we learned that the hard way. So we hired people remotely. We've always been a remote. Our clients are remote across the US, and our staff are remote across the US. And that's fantastic because I'm not constrained by a geographical location. But it turns out having staff in different states opens up me to a raft of registration requirements and taxation requirements,
Tax,
and filing
payroll,
requirements.
yeah,
Yes.
licensing,
Workers' comp.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've learned this hard. And this other thing I've found is that at first I used to rail against all this stuff. I used to get angry that the US positioned itself as the entrepreneurial centre of the world, and it is. And then I'd bump up against all this idiosyncratic red tape and challenges, and I used to get frustrated and annoyed, and that had solved nothing. But now I kind of just roll with it, and I accept this is not like this. New York and Connecticut is not the same as Lancashire and Yorkshire. There are massive differences, and I accept that. And it's on me, not on America, to change. And part of this podcast now, and why we're having this conversation, is about if we can share this with people before they get here, or when they're just here, we can save them a lot of heartache and a lot of headaches, and maybe even a failure.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. I think you're absolutely right. And the other thing which I think people find challenging to get to grips with is the compensation expectations in the US. So what you have to pay to get good people for your firm. And if you try to use benchmarks from the UK, you're going to really struggle, particularly in things like sales. But more or less across the piece, the compensation levels are higher in the US, and the expectations are higher, and the all-in cost of employment is therefore going to be higher because the employer has to pay for quite expensive healthcare benefits and some form of pension benefits. So I think there's, as they say in the States, there's often a bit of sticker shock when people people realise what the cost is going to be of hiring people, particularly good people. But as you said, you can rail against that as much as you like, and it won't change it. It's still going to be the case that if you want good people, you're going to have to pay the higher levels of compensation than you'd pay for the equivalent role in the UK.
And we can smile about it, but and if you've got deep pockets, it's a frustration, but you can wear it. But the danger is when you're an entrepreneurial client, and these are the people we often speak to, who have come to America on the same budget, and then they get knee deep into it, and they realize this isn't going to work.
No.
And that's when. So again, if we can forewarn them that they need to have deeper coffers when venturing over here, and the opportunities here.
And you just have to do the planning because the revenue opportunity is much bigger here as well. So you're talking about much bigger scale, and therefore the cost of employment. Although it's understandable that people are concerned about it. Entrepreneurs are concerned about it. But it is a fact of life, and the revenue opportunity is bigger. So plan for that, and make that work. It's interesting. There are differences for market entry for entrepreneurial companies, owner managed companies, to corporates. We also recommend for owner managed or privately held companies that when they come to the US, they should send the owner. The owner should come, or one of the principals, to really drive it. It's very, very difficult to do it remotely and to be successful remotely. For corporates, of course, large corporates have a different. You can hire senior people locally and so on. But I do think. I mean, I've seen too many entrepreneurial companies launch in the US, not send the owner or the principal, and then wonder why it doesn't have the momentum. Think, well, I was there once a month, and that just doesn't work. If you're gonna do it, really commit to it.
Yeah, and then you have to embrace the joys of the US immigration system. That's something in it. So, but again, we have BAB members who can support with that.
We certainly do.
Can we just take a step back a second? And can you tell us I gave the sanitized version, but can you give us an abridged version in your own words of your story, how you ended up in America, what that was like professionally, what was that like career personally, and how you ended up at the BAB, and then we can get into the great work the BAB does.
Yeah, of course. I spent nearly 35 years in the media business. So out of university, I went into the media business in London, and shortly after that, I joined the UK office of a large US media company called the Hearst Corporation, which is famous for newspapers, magazines, TV stations, and so on. Probably best known in the UK for magazines like Cosmopolitan and Good Housekeeping and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But a much broader business than that. Anyway, I worked for that company for nearly 30 years. I was the UK CEO and country manager. And then I moved here, I was promoted, and became the president and CEO of all the non-US media businesses, the consumer media businesses. So it's quite a large job. Big international,
global, right?
Big international job. So we owned, and while I was there, we acquired businesses pretty much all over the world. So I spent 8+ years basically on a plane, based in New York City, but traveling all over the world, often to not very easy places. It's funny to think about it now, but we had big businesses in both Russia and China, which were fantastic at the time, and very profitable businesses, but now look much more challenging, of course. But
anyway, when were you here, Duncan? What decade? Are we in the noughties? When were you?
I moved to the US in 2009. So
2009. Also in the wreckage of the crisis, the global
honestly,
crisis.
So the years after that were actually pretty good in the media business. So 2009 was a tough year, of course, for advertising-funded businesses. But the years after that, until 2016, were actually pretty good. There was a lot of change, obviously, in media. The internet had been around for a long time in media, but the mobile internet was what really drove the change in that space, and so consumers' behavior changed, and advertisers' behavior changed. But it was a pretty good time, and kind of great company I worked for. I joined that company in 1989, so I spent the majority of my career working for Hearst, and it's a fantastic organization. So anyway, so I came here with my family in 2009. I had kids at high school age. They went to high school in Manhattan, and we've had the full adventure of. I'm now an American, actually. I'm a dual citizen. I've been an American citizen for about 4 months.
Oh, really? Brand new and newly mint. So you've just on the you did your oath recently.
I did in December.
That must be. There can't be many people who get awarded an OBE at the end of 1 year and then take the American oath a matter of months later.
About the same time, in fact. So
wow.
Anyway, yeah. So I left Hearst in 2017, and I'd been involved with British American business. Hearst is a member of BAB, has been for many years, as a US company that's had a big UK presence for 100 years. And I actually represented Hearst on the advisory board of BAB, which is, we have this advisory board of CEOs and chairs and other senior executives. I was on that advisory board. For many years, it was chaired by Sir Martin Sorrell, the advertising executive. entrepreneur. And Martin, I knew Martin, of course, from media, and so I was on that advisory board. Anyway, when I left Hearst, it happened to coincide with the time when BAB was looking for a new CEO, and they had a search out, and they were looking for someone who hadn't come up through the trade association or chamber of commerce route, but had been an operating executive in a big company. Anyway, that suited me. I didn't want to stay in corporate life. I'd kind of done that. So I was looking for something to do that would keep me kind of busy and in the world and interesting, that wasn't corporate. So this turned out to be exactly that thing. So, and I've been doing it ever since. So I joined in 2018. So I've now done six years here.
Great. And how's that been?
Do you know, it's been fantastic, super interesting. You know, not everyone would enjoy the transition from a senior job in a big corporate environment to, you know, a job running a 25-person non-profit organization. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to have no ego. You know, there's no big black car waiting outside to take me anywhere. I make my own tea and do my own photocopying. So
sounds awful.
Yeah, it's terrible. You know, well, if you it's awful to think about it, but if you have been, if you have been a senior executive in a large company, and there are some support networks which are very helpful and quite nice.
Duncan, people can say what they want, you know, about, but you see those black cars whisking people away, and especially at the airport, no one's thinking, "Oh, I wish I'm so glad that's not me." Yeah. You know, everyone wants to be in one of those big Tahoes or whatever.
Yeah, there's certainly something to be said for it. But it's been great. I mean, and you know, what we've tried to do since I've been here is to make a difference. I mean, that's really what we're for. And just to give your listeners kind of some background, what we do at British American Business. So we are the American Chamber of Commerce in the UK. So we represent US companies that are doing business in the UK, but we're also the British Chamber of Commerce in the United States. So we represent UK companies here. And these were two separate organizations, both more than 100 years old, that were merged about 25 years ago to create a bilateral Chamber of Commerce. So that's what we do. We are a pro-business, pro-trade voice for US-UK trade and investment, a champion of trade and investment, an advocate for kind of more liberalized trade and investment. And we kind of operate in three areas. First of all, we do public policy work. So for large companies, we are a voice for them in Washington and London, advocating for anything that can be helpful to encourage trade and investment between the US and the UK. So we produce white papers, we engage with government, we do all of the kind of advocacy on behalf of large companies to help protect the trade and investment environment. But we also do a lot of what I consider to be more of the contact sport of business, which is, providing opportunities for companies to meet each other. So we do a lot of convening, we do a lot of networking, and we do a lot of kind of events with themes that companies are kind of worrying about and thinking about, whether it be kind of practical issues like how to get a visa, or tax issues, or kind of broader things like sustainability regulation or DE&I issues. So pretty much anything that businesses are worrying about and grappling with of any size, whether you're a giant multinational or an entrepreneurial small company, we try to reflect in the content and the programming that we put on through our events, which, as I say, also act as a kind of platform for people to meet each other. And and that's what we do. So
Yeah, I've been surprised by the breadth of the membership, large and small. We didn't join for a while, just assuming because we're a really small boutique firm, and we just thought it would be for the behemoths, of the transatlantic trade, and we were totally wrong in that. Completely wrong, and I'm so glad we came to our senses, and here we are. It's been a fantastic.
I'm glad to hear it.
It's a little bit, we're a small firm out in Greenwich, Connecticut, serving Brits. We're spread out across the US. Our clients spread out across the US. It can feel a bit lonely, and I feel a little bit more plugged into the community through BAB, and obviously
it's certainly the case. I think it's certainly the case that. So companies join us for different reasons, and the giant companies with public affairs teams and government relations teams, they're a member of ours because they want our representation in Washington and London on these big issues, and they've got budgets to do that work. But for entrepreneurial companies, I absolutely understand that it's about building a personal network as much as a business network. You arrive in New York City, you don't know anyone, and you're trying to build a network. We're a very good place to land and to immediately build a network of connections and people. You may make some friends, as well as business connections, and we hear that all the time. And we do the same. We do the same in London too. So we have exactly a mirror operation in the UK. And a mix of giant companies there and the entrepreneurial businesses that are servicing them and others. So it's worked pretty well. We're growing as an organisation, and more to come, I think.
Out of interest, I'm always intrigued by how this works. I mean, is it literally the lobbying that we see on TV? How do you influence stuff in Washington? Like, what's the process? Do you have a lobbying team? Do you employ a lobbying firm? How does that work? Is it House of Cards style influence?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, we're not a lobbyist. There's a legal definition of lobbying in the US, which requires a lot of regulation and licensing, and we are not a registered lobbyist. So we don't take money from a client to argue for a particular piece of legislation. So we don't do that. What we are is an advocate, and we'll do advocacy and influencing on a very clear set of issues, which is our mission is to be a champion of trade and investment between the US and the UK. So whenever there's an issue that can either positively or negatively affect trade and investment between the US and the UK, we'll take a position on it. And our approach is really, I guess, threefold. The first is we'll write about it. So we'll produce a white paper. We'll set out the issue that our members are concerned about, and we'll try to talk about why it's an issue, why it matters, and what a potential remedy will be. So that's the first stage. The second stage is we'll then bring those members in front of the relevant influencers, whether that's elected politicians or civil servants or other advocacy groups. So we'll do roundtables, we'll do meetings to set out.
Literally with like congressmen or senators, could there be that down to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we engage with the Congress, those representatives in Congress who are interested in this stuff. Yeah, we engage with them. We have a team of 3 full-time people in Washington, and I try to be in Washington once a month, and then we do the same in London as well. So we work very closely with the Department for Business and Trade, both in London and here, and the other government departments that occasionally have interest in this stuff. So Foreign Office, DCIT, DCMS sometimes. So yeah, we'll engage with these companies when there are issues that really matter.
Do you think the institutional or governmental administrative heights of Washington and London, is there a genuine appetite to work? We know Brits are welcomed in America by Americans in general, but is there an appetite at the government level to facilitate our ties and links and make it easier for us to work together?
From the US government perspective, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. But not more than any other country, I would say.
Okay.
So under the current administration, there have been no trade liberalization deals done. So the US under the current administration has really focused on trying to protect US jobs and US industry. And you'll have read about this, but that has meant there has been no further liberalization for UK companies or any other companies from around the world in accessing the US market. The US market still is a very open market comparatively to the rest of the world. Tariffs are low, so if you're exporting stuff here, tariffs tend to be low with one or two exceptions. There aren't many businesses that a UK company can't get into. If you've got the desire to set up a business in the US, you pretty much can. So there are no additional barriers, but there hasn't been any effort to further liberalize trade and investment with the UK. On the margin, that might make the difference. So what the UK has done instead is because they were really pushing for a free trade agreement, the UK government was, and got pretty close to it under the prior Trump administration. But anyway, the election happened, so that all died. But since then, what the UK has done, they've been pretty smart about this, is they've negotiated some what I would call trade promotion agreements with individual US states. There are 9 of these now, and these agreements are basically an agreement between the states and the UK that they'll work together to encourage more commerce and economic activity between the UK and that individual state. And so that means, more trade missions, more opportunities to access help, both from the UK team in those states, but also from the state development agencies. And just as we describe it, you're likely to get a slightly warmer welcome if you show up in Florida and Texas or the Carolinas or Oklahoma and these other places where these agreements have been negotiated. And if you're keen to do that, you should go through. You can talk to us and we can connect you. But there are teams within the Department for Business and Trade that are there to help companies access the benefits of those agreements.
It's fascinating when the pieces of a jigsaw come together. So obviously, post-Brexit, a lot of noise was made about a free trade agreement with America, and it didn't come to fruition. And then over the last couple of years, I've seen various posts from the BAB announcing these MOUs, with these various states. And I didn't realize that from what you've said, it sounds like that was a pivot from, free trade agreement isn't happening. What can we do? Well, we'll go to each individual state. Again, one of those unique things about the US is there was one government and then there's another 50. And that's what you're doing. You're doing it state by state rather than at the federal level. Okay.
Yeah, they're slightly different because what they can't do at a state level is they can't affect tariffs. So for exporters from the UK, what you have to pay in terms of at the customs, they can't change those, and they can't change market access. So if your product is not allowed into the US for any reason or has a quota, which is really only around agricultural products and other things like that, They can't change those. But what they can do is say, we want your business. Come to Florida and we'll help you. And of course, all countries want foreign direct investment. So the UK is desperate for American companies to invest in the UK, and it's no different there than it is in the US. It helps to have that energy and capital being deployed, in those states. It's very interesting. So there are UK companies active in every state, in all 50 states. In fact, we think, although it's hard to prove, but that there are UK companies employing people in every congressional district of the United States. So, and honestly, wherever you go, you'll find a UK company, either a giant company like a BP or a BT or a Shell or Unilever or Glaxo, GSK, or independent entrepreneurial companies, that have set up shop.
So if I'm in the UK and I'm looking to the US, and I'm in one of these industries that these MOUs support or encourage to come, and I'm looking at, let's say I'm looking at Florida, which has one of these arrangements, and I'm in an industry that fits it, or I'm looking at I'm considering another state that doesn't have the MOU. All things being equal, I'm going to find a more welcoming. They're going to roll the red carpet out a little bit more in Florida. What does that actually look like?
Well, that's at least the theory. So, in Florida, for example, they're focusing on insurance-based businesses. It's a big area of interest for them. Space and defense and aerospace industries. Inevitably, they're going to be more focused on big companies than small companies, because that's where the dollars are for them. That's where the reward is. But the Florida Economic Development Agency is now tasked with making this MOU work. So there are, and we publish information about this. In fact, we're about to, in early June, we'll publish our latest edition of our trade guide to the USA, which will include all the contact details for the states with the MOUs. So you can access that on our website, www.babinc.org, and you'll be able to find the information about how to access help from those states with which there are MOUs. You can also access it through the Department for Business and Trade as well, and their teams locally in those states are also tasked with making these MOUs work. So there's a couple of ways that you can go about accessing the help.
It sounds like the starting point, though, is this updated trade and investment guide. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, we publish a trade guide to the US, which we update every 2 years. And what we try to do here is to give you kind of everything you need to think about before you pull the trigger on either building an export business or actually setting up shop in the US. So there are contributions in there from both the governments, so the US, the UK embassy in the USA, the US embassy in London and the commercial services team there. There are contributions in there from lots of the states in the USA. And then there are contributions from lawyers, accountants, real estate advisors, tax advisors, who can help you think through the challenges and what you need to think about in planning a market entry strategy. So it's rammed full of contact information. Yeah, it's not universal. Of course, we don't include everything, but there's enough in there for anyone who is seriously interested in setting up shop here in the US to read through and to kind of think whether they're properly prepared.
It's not just the information, which is critical. It's the network, right? One thing, again, I've learned a lot of this the hard way. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learned a lot along the way. One of the most valuable things I now have is access to a network of cross-border professionals, and I can't even imagine if I was thinking of coming to the US, trying to find the right attorneys, accountants, registration experts, and the list goes on and on and on. Immigration people, the amount of moving parts in all this, and you get it wrong, there can be severe consequences.
That can, and it's interesting that your list starts with attorneys because you need a lawyer.
This is America.
Yes. In the US, you need legal advice as you make decisions, all the time, and finding a lawyer that's right for you, that is the right size for you, I think is very important. So there's no point going to a giant law firm if you're a tiny company, and sometimes you might not get, if you're a big company, you might need the breadth of services that a very large firm might offer you. So finding the right people and those that genuinely understand market entry and can intuit the issues that a UK-based company might be thinking about and might not understand is really important.
We're a relatively new BAB member, and I didn't realise about this guide existed. And I can think of, off the top of my head, 3 people. People contact us who've got their eye on America or who are freshly here, and I can think of people who would have benefited from this straight away. So, what a resource.
It's a useful resource, and we do the same going the other way as well. So we publish a trade guide to the UK for US companies, and so that'll be updated in 2025. And the other thing we try to do is tell stories of success, because although I talked about the challenges and some of the failures, there are also plenty of fantastic success stories of UK companies that have built businesses here and pursued different strategies towards that success. Actually physically coming here and building a business is not the only way. I mean, if you can do it through exports, you can do it remotely or by visiting here through distributors if you've got a physical product. Or a virtual product. You don't have to physically be here. There's more than one way to heaven, and there are some great success stories in all of those areas.
Do you think Brexit has changed the focus of British companies to America? And I was talking to someone recently. I know I'm beating this drum, but a fellow BAB member, and we were talking about there seemed to be an increased appetite for British companies looking to America, and they speculated that they thought it was because of Brexit, because Brexit had made potentially trading with Europe harder, so that it just led, the focus had turned across the Atlantic. Do you see any truth in that?
Maybe. I mean, the truth is that the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that the UK has with the EU, is the world's most comprehensive free trade agreement. So it is the only difference for UK companies trading with the EU is a little bit of paperwork. So you have to do. There's no restrictions on selling stuff into the EU. There's no quotas. There's no tariffs. It's a full free trade agreement, but there is paperwork, and so because there are you have to do customs declarations. And there's also a perception that it's more difficult, even though the reality may be that it isn't. So for that reason, I think you're right. The US looks amazingly attractive. Growth rates in the US, economic growth rates are just better. The economy is just better. So, if you're going to put your money to work or take a bet, you're more likely to do that in a market that's growing more rapidly. and feels more dynamic than one that is not growing so dynamically.
You know, the one thing about the US, and I can't really explain it, there's just so much opportunity here. I think the UK is quite entrepreneurial. I know we have a longer history, and that might that might have implications on our the ease of entrepreneurship. But the US and the US is not a panacea for it's not bureaucracy free. It's not without its challenges, but there is just so much opportunity here. They just seem to generate a level of opportunity and wealth that is unrivaled. I don't quite know how they do it. I've been here nearly a decade. I'm also an American now, and I'm in awe of it, but I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah, the entrepreneurial spirit in the US is amazing. I mean, I think the UK is a very entrepreneurial country, but I think one of the differences is that the UK tends to breed people who what I would describe as satisficers, so who may be entrepreneurial but end up being satisfied with a level of success that in the US people would think, well, you're just getting started. So once entrepreneurs in the UK have made enough money to have a nice lifestyle and so on, they tend to sell and call it a day. That is not the case in the US.
No.
Enough is never enough in the US. So that's why you get these entrepreneurs who are still hard charging when they've got billions of dollars in the bank and are still pressing and pushing and so on. And it's a different culture. So enough, never enough in the US, and that's that drives the entrepreneurial culture here.
And this is a double-edged sword, but winning, their obsession with winning, whatever that might be, winning the entrepreneurial game, winning the sports game. And there's a flip side to that where it can manifest its, they can take things too far, and you can win a race, but there can be a wrong way of winning. Let's put it that way. So there's a flip side to it as well, but I think that captures it quite nicely.
Yeah.
So that's dangerous territory perhaps, but we're on the eve of an election. Well, we're not quite on the eve, but it's starting to gear up. What happens if we have a change of administration? Or we don't? Does that have much of an impact for the BAB and for how you see the business climate for this transatlantic trade?
Well, I think if the polls are right, and there's no reason at the moment to think that they're not, then we're likely to have a change of government in the UK and a change of government in the US. My view is that the change of government in the UK, probably for the business environment, is fairly neutral. So, because we think about it from the perspective of US companies who may be investing in the UK. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there anything about a change of administration in the UK that would put off US companies from investing in the UK? Well, there may be if tax rates go up, particularly corporation tax. That's the issue to really watch. And so we'll be focusing a lot on that. And whether the cost of doing business in the UK rises through things like energy levies, more payroll taxes, and so on and so forth. So that's the issue there.
Do you think the UK is it still attractive for business, or do you think is it overtaxed or over levied, and is it heading that way, or is it still friendly?
The UK has been very successful at attracting foreign direct investment, particularly from the US, over many decades. And it has a lot of advantages over the competitors so if you're a US company and you're looking at building a resource in the European region, the UK is the most likely place you're going to choose, whether you're a financial services company or a tech company, or unless it's sort of heavy manufacturing, it's the UK is the most likely place. So if you're a pharmaceutical company or whatever, and that was because of lots of reasons, language, rule of law, time zone, all these educated workforce, all these things are very, very positive. It was also because the cost of doing business was relatively attractive. Relatively low tax compared to some of mainland Europe, relatively liberal sort of competition environment. You can hire and fire relatively easily compared to Germany or France or Italy. And some of that's changing. So the cost of doing business in the UK is rising. Corporation tax, some of these levies like energy levy, other payroll taxes, and it's likely a Labour administration will add more cost to companies in the UK. So I don't think it's a disaster, but we certainly at BAB are talking about this a lot, saying be careful to the UK government and the opposition. Be careful. Don't kill, your advantages. Don't take them for granted. It's really important if you want to attract inward investment from the US that you remain super competitive on tax and labour flexibility are the two key issues. So hiring people and letting them go, which companies have to do. And if that becomes prohibitively expensive, then it becomes less attractive. So that's the UK. On the US, again, I may be completely wrong, but the polls are indicating that it's likely that Donald Trump will win a second presidential term. Everyone will have their own views about this. We don't see this as some of the more kind of extreme commentary about this, that it's somehow the end of democracy or anything like that. We don't see that. We see that there'll be 4 years. It'll be relatively pro-business administration. People are very reticent to say what they prefer, sort of senior executives, but our soundings are that probably a Trump administration, second Trump administration, will be seen as more kind of business friendly. Certainly on tax, certainly on regulation, and those would be the main issues.
That all makes sense. But
who knows?
The brand.
A lot of the focus is on non-business issues, of course, and that's not really a subject that I'll spend time on.
No, although there's a lot has happened in the last 4 years, and it's going to be interesting to see if he does get in, his response to that. It's going to be interesting, if nothing else. Let's put it that way.
One of the things to pay attention to is trade policy, because the former US trade representative, a guy called Bob Lighthizer, is very, very influential in the sort of Trump camp, and he was influential last time around and will be if Trump wins. And he has a belief, and that the US is being disadvantaged in the international trade environment, and believes that there needs to be a reset. So countries with whom the US has a trade deficit, so a country sells more stuff to the US than the US sells to that country, may still have higher tariffs on the US than the US has on the other end of the corridor. And that's true. And yet it's very difficult to change that in the WTO for complicated reasons. And this guy Lighthizer believes that's unfair. And so you might see some quite dramatic changes in policy towards trade. And frankly, whoever wins the election, you're going to see that around China. Just this week, the Biden administration, for example, has imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and very, very dramatic tariffs on Chinese-made semiconductors and solar panels and things like that. So the view about China is kind of, bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats feel the same. They're just vying for each other who can be more kind of anti-China. And the sort of America First sort of language of we need to protect our industry, we need to protect our workers from unfair foreign competition and imports, particularly focused on China, but not only China, is a real issue. And trade hasn't really been an election issue in the US for like 100 years. I mean, it used to be back in the late 19th and early 20th century. Trade was a massive issue in these general elections, and whether to have these very big tariffs or not. And it
massive protectionists, weren't they? America.
Well, always protectionists. From Washington onwards, they believed that the only way U.S. industry, because it was an agrarian, country, so the only way you could start, industry here was to protect it from competition from imports from the UK or from France or from Spain or wherever it was. And that's how they built their industrial base here, through a very, very high levels of tariff. And it was very popular. It was not really disputed. And while the UK went through the free trade revolution in the 19th century, the US did not. And anyway, we'll see. It will be. It's not going to be the thing that people are thinking about. The average American's thinking about when they go into the ballot box. They're going to be thinking about. To be honest, I think they're all going to be thinking about inflation. That is the one thing that will drive. People are thinking, has my living standard gone up or down over the last 4 years after I've paid for my housing, my car, my food, my holiday, my mobile phone, etc., my insurance. That'll be what drives it. And incumbent governments, whether they're to the left or the right, are going to feel some heat, I think, in this round of elections.
I think you're spot on, and I think it's unfair in a way.
Yeah, it's not there. I mean, there's not much they can do about the inflation. But you'll still be punished for it.
Well, here in the US, the inflation was partly caused by Trump, partly caused by Biden, and partly caused by a whole load of things.
And by the world,
But I think Biden has done a good job on many respects. And it's certainly been less chaotic. But I think this inflation issue is going to obscure everything. As all, I'm sure it's the same for you. Your weekly bills have gone through the roof, and people don't see past that, and they'll just point the finger. Here's a question for you, based on what you said about protectionism and the history here. You're in the business of open trade, right? But it seems, based on the last few years and what you've just said, that the world seems to be turning in on itself again. Are you seeing day to day? Are you seeing that, or are you seeing there's a rhetoric, but people are still very open? We still have a global outlook.
The problem is, yes, we instinctively we believe in free trade and open access. But the only way that works is if countries comply with the rules that go along with that. So no government subsidies, it's fair competition. You build something, and if you can build it better and cheaper, great. But not if doing that is driven by government subsidy that therefore enables you to build something cheaper and so on. And so most of the worry about this has been driven by China, which has repeatedly not abided by the rules of the WTO. And this is what's driving change. So there isn't a large company in the world that hasn't been rethinking its exposure to China. So every large company that has been making things in China or has been rethinking whether that's sensible and to what extent they should be exposed to that. And that's meant a lot of movement out of China to, frankly, to other low-cost destinations. So Indonesia, Philippines, India has been a huge beneficiary of this change. So to a less risky place. So yeah, I mean, there is definitely, the decoupling, as they call it, between China and America is real, and that together with, both the impact of the Ukraine war and COVID has led to some deglobalization. So at the start of COVID, it was only when something super bad happens that people kind of understand the way that the economy has worked, the global supply chain. And so countries like the US and the UK realized that all of the painkillers that they sell, aspirin, analgesics, whatever, all of the painkillers that they sell in the UK and the US are made in China. And so you think, bloody hell. And all of the surgical gowns and the, what do they call it? What's the term that we all got to know? Protective clothing, PPE, that's right. All of that was made in China. So you didn't have any. When suddenly you needed it and you needed painkillers or antibiotics, we didn't make any in the US and we didn't make any in the UK. And people were thinking, well, is that right? Are we, it's only when you get tested at the extreme that these things come into real focus. And so, I don't think either the US, the UK or the EU is ever going to allow itself to be in a position where at the extreme of events, war, pandemic, you can't feed your country, you can't provide your country with the right drugs and healthcare. This was why under the Trump administration the steel tariffs were put in place, because there was no steel manufacturing left in the US because steel was cheaper to buy from China or Korea.
Yeah.
And so you think, well, is that a national security issue? Well, not most of the time, but if something disastrous happens and you can't make steel, you've got to, or you don't have any capability of making steel because they've all closed down, then it's a problem. And so these issues are so nuanced. But to answer your question, unfortunately, we're going through a trend which is absolutely clear towards greater protection of local jobs, local industries, reshoring of industries that had been outsourced to cheaper economies, particularly those that have been outsourced to more risky geopolitical economies like China being the main one. And the US is leading that. But EU's doing similar things, and the UK is doing similar things too.
Hopefully it's just a case of one step back to take two steps forward. Because I think if this trend continues indefinitely, and everyone becomes more excessive inward looking, ends in disaster. I think.
Well, hopefully, and by the way, the US has talked about this, that as well as reshoring, people have been talking about friendshoring or ally shoring, as they call it. So this was this concept that if you're gonna bring supply chains back from high risk environments like China and other places like that, then if they don't necessarily need to come back to the US, but they could go to an allied country or a country where you have a very close and relatively risk-free relationship, like the UK, or in theory the EU, Canada, these kind of countries where the chances of us not being able to buy
Yeah.
steel from or semiconductors or analgesics from the UK is pretty low.
It's like the Five Eyes thing, isn't it? Where we have
It is like
that shared.
Who do you trust? Who do you trust?
Yeah.
And the UK is in a good position there, and the UK continues to be by far the most important ally to the US when it comes to hard security and intelligence issues. The Five Eyes, really, within the Five Eyes, there are three eyes. The US, the UK, and Australia. Sort of Canada and New Zealand are on more of the periphery. And within the three eyes, it's really the US and the UK that have the real capability for military intelligence. You know, things like GCHQ in the UK is the world's most advanced, you know, electronic spying facility, listening to internet chatter and understanding what's going on in the world, and that's a hugely valuable asset to the US. So they're absolutely locked together. The military intelligence and security teams in the US and the UK, and that kind of transcends who might be in number 10 or the White House.
Yeah, good. Do you have a protest?
There is a bit of a protest outside, and I am also coming to the end of my allotted time, I think. So,
okay. Well, in that case, Duncan, let me ask. So thank you for coming on today. As we wrap up here, where can people find you and or the BAB?
So you can find us or at www.babinc.org, and you can also find us at British American Business on LinkedIn. We are super active on LinkedIn, and we post all of our activity there, so you'll be able to see what we're up to there, or just give us a call.
And I endorse that message. We joined a while ago. It's been a great resource for us. I met some great people, and I'm excited to where this journey will take us. And if you are thinking of coming to the US, go and check out this trade and investment guide, because I tell you, if they can help you understand what you need to know, and more importantly, in some ways, the people and the firms that you should be speaking to help you, that is invaluable. So, thank you, Duncan. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Cheers. Good. Me too. Bye-bye.